The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. As you can see, we have Leah Shaper with us, my lovely partner, joining us on the second episode of Cosmic Catastrophe, a show that is going to bring you a little bit more clarity about our recent past and maybe some of the hidden information about civilizations that once were here on the earth that literally got wiped off of the face of it. So without any further ado, today we're going to be discussing a very near and dear topic, the Younger Dryas event, and specifically the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Now, this was first posited back in 2007, seemingly not to the delight of paleontologists at the time. They hated the idea. And they poo-pooed it, and then almost every paper that came out from 2007 to 2009 was disregarded. And then they focused, because for some reason the scientific community focused on the Clovis hypothesis that assumed that the people that were living in North America hunted all the megafauna to extinction. And then and it's had something to do with the global warming theory and the funding issue. But the fact that there was overwhelming evidence pouring in over that decade on all different types of cosmogenic sources for the mass extinction were basically ignored. Now, how much about this do you know, Leah?
I mean, I know a little bits here and there. I've reviewed some of this material with you. I think it's interesting, the whole idea about the megafauna being hunted to extinction, I've always found pretty ridiculous. I think it overestimates how much power human beings really have. I think we have the same problem when we talk about global warming. The idea that we can match the power of the sun to warm the earth. And I kind of feel the same way about the megafauna, the idea that we could hunt all of them to extinction. I mean, perhaps if we had 20 billion people on the planet and we were all hunting, maybe, but that seems kind of far out to me.
Yeah, the estimates for the Clovis culture is anywhere between 1 and, let's say, 10 million. And 10 million people think is a ridiculous number. But if you just look at the amount of Native Americans that were recently in North America, let's say at somewhere in Pennsylvania at the conjunction of the Schuylkill River and the Perkiomen Creek. This is literally in the middle of nowhere. It was estimated to be 3 to 5 million natives, Delaware Indians, that are just living there. So the populations could be even higher. Now, the problem with the whole overhunting hypothesis is that the Clovis people went extinct at the same time of all these megafauna. And so the scientists that were pushing that narrative either were doing it strictly for funding or are that inept. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that assessment. I mean, I don't see how that is otherwise possible. And there has to be an explanation for why all of the megafauna and the Clovis people went extinct at the same time.
But there is a good one, and we're going to go over all the evidence in the next 50 minutes or so. So let's get on with what we know about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. It is a recent theory, and when I mean recent, it's 2007. It suggests that cometary or meteoric body or bodies, and that's what I'm going to be leaning towards here, hit and or exploded over North America about 12,900 years ago. Now, we're going to see some very specific dating that came in from a friend of the channel, Paul Laviolette, about a decade ago. There is lake sediments in the form of varves, V-A-R-V-E. And a varve sediment, if you go deep into a lake, certain lakes, when it goes from winter to summer, the type of deposition changes dramatically from clays to silts. So you get these alternating perfect layers of different thicknesses of clay silt, and each of those varves is a year. And if you can find paleontological evidence like pollen or data or something like that, you can then have very specific dating. And in this particular lake that they used, there was very specific dating that went right through that 12,900 year period. And so what they did was they sampled it all and they tested for cosmogenic elements. And guess what they found?
Cosmogenic elements.
Yes, in the form of beryllium-10. Now, beryllium has one stable isotope, beryllium-9. It's found, it's naturally occurring on Earth. There is no beryllium-10 on Earth. The only place we know beryllium-10 is formed is when cosmic rays come down through our atmosphere and they nucleate this beryllium-10 up in the stratosphere, which then rains down on the planet. So it only happens during supernovas or outbursts from our sun. And the data that they collected in the lake showed that for a period of about 140 years, and we're going to get to those specific dates, that beryllium was raining down on the planet for about 140 years, peaking around 12,800 years ago. And then it precipitously dropped off. And then during that 140-year period, the Clovis go dead. 65% of the megafauna in this huge regional area go extinct. And let's say 70% of boreal forests in the northern hemisphere burn. And so the Clovis people must have done that.
It's completely ridiculous, right? I mean, I'm sure we'll get to this, but I was thinking this morning about the huge temperature spike that happened right before the Younger Dryas. And it's like, okay, well, what's the explanation for that? I mean, an asteroid is not going to cause a temperature spike like that. You need a massive amount of power to cause that.
Now,
so it has to be something going on with the sun.
That spike is repeated about every 100,000 years. If you look at the last 800,000 years of high-resolution ice data that we have, you're going to find that there's a phase shift. That in the first 400,000 years of the data, we had major temperature shifts every 40,000 years. And all of a sudden, around 500,000 years ago, it shifted to 100,000 years, where there's a rapid spike and then a gradual drop into a hellish ice age for the rest of the 100,000 years. And at the top of the spikes is a warm period we call an interstadial, which corresponds to the Sumerian kings list. The first of these 100,000 year interstadials is about 450,000 years ago, which is when the Sumerian kings list begins, which would suggest that the interstadials are when civilizations are built. And then for 80,000 years, they hang on and then they're destroyed in the next cycle, where the temperature comes up 25 degrees. And then we go back into ice age. So the swing up in temperature isn't unique. It's been happening every 100,000 years. What's unique this time, and not like the other ones, was this weird drop back down into even deeper ice age for about 2,000 years. It's about 1,500 years. So that is what, so first of all, here's what's funny. No one can explain what the 100,000 year cycle is or the 40,000 year cycle. We used to explain at university that it is the Milankovic cycles. So, and these are perturbations of our orbit of the Earth, where it gets more elongate, more prolate, and things like that. And the axis tilts further up and down. So the eccentricity of the orbit is the amount of wobble. And it gradually changes. It doesn't abruptly change that would give you a spike. And the eccentricity of the orbit of the Earth around the sun gets fatter and thinner. That's gradual too. That doesn't just change overnight and wouldn't cause a spike. So no one has been able to successfully explain what the major 40,000 year cycle is in the first, from 400 to 800,000 years ago, and now what the 100,000 year cycle is. No one. But what's unique, so let's just go over that, because we're talking about a different event. After the Earth warmed, for some reason, for 2,000 years, this hellish event occurred, and we have a mass extinction. And it's probably a cosmic catastrophe. Now, you bring up a good point, that the warming began 14,900 years ago. There is no cosmogenic event then. And then there was a drop down right after that. Still not this Dryas, it's the first Dryas. So there's a cooling event that happens, and then there's no beryllium. There's no microspherules. There is no shocked quartz. There is no cosmogenic precursors here. There's no burnt forests. Then the temperature tries to recover again. Then it drops down again. And then it recovers again. And then the third time is the Younger Dryas drop down, when it drops deeper than the last ice age. And that's when we have the cosmogenic stuff. So what we should talk about is what began the drop downs. There's like 3 pulses and then the Younger Dryas event.
Well, and what caused the spike? I mean, because the spike is really extremely aberrant. I mean, it's straight up. It's 13 to 15 degrees C. I mean, that's enormous.
Yeah. And it's in a geologic instant, so it would be catastrophic. So, but here's what's more interesting. When you look at the work of Randall Carlson, and I've been studying some of the flooding in northern Africa that goes over into Saudi Arabia, these massive, it appears as if massive rain events occurred where it rained for weeks or months over a single area and literally washed the whole northern part of Africa off into the ocean. And the same thing is happening when the glaciers in North America begin melting, maybe at 14,900 years ago, the glaciers had to begin melting. The temperature goes up 25 degrees. But they're not going to begin melting catastrophically. They're just going to start flooding. It's going to take hundreds of years to melt 5 miles of ice, even if it's 90 degrees all day. I mean, put an ice cube outside. It just doesn't catastrophically melt. It takes time because the middle of the ice is still frozen. So the glaciers are starting to melt 14,900 years ago, but those catastrophic floods, I don't think happen until whatever this event, the Younger Dryas event is. Now, do you have any thoughts on the earlier melting?
I don't really. I mean, other than, you know, the cycles that we've seen in the record. I mean, I don't know what the reason is exactly, but just following along those cycles, that would explain it.
Yeah, so on the final and the third drop down, the Younger Dryas event, 12-9, we also have radioactive iridium showing up in the stratigraphy, as well as fullerenes. Yeah, if anyone knows Buckminster fullerene or C60 that many people hawk on their channels, it is a super antioxidant, and it's hard to come by. But in space, it's easy to make fullerenes, and so another cosmogenic signature there.
Thank you, space.
Yeah. So we also have in terrestrial deposits. That simply means that, like in lake sediments or stream sediments, there are these things called magnetic grains. And so you can only get that like during a lightning strike or something very significant. And so that's very odd. And they are in association with something called microspherules. These are found on Mars. They're found near impact craters, and they're raining down because these are in locations where there are no impact craters. They're being deposited by water. So that's very bizarre. You have this cosmogenic material raining down from the sky, and you're not near an impactor.
Do you know what the microspherules are made up of?
They're typically just like pure silicon or a pure, you know, typically silicon.
Okay, and then so also didn't the black mats also, or weren't they also found to contain microdiamonds? Is that correct?
Nanodiamonds, they're called.
Nanodiamonds,
They're even
yeah.
smaller, and those occur only from lightning or nuclear explosions.
Or like asteroid impacts as well can cause them, right?
It wouldn't be the impact because there are no impactors near these sites. But and from the evidence we have, I mean, the Tunguska event is the most recent evidence that when large objects come in at a steep angle, they don't hit the ground. They build up so much charge that the static friction from the whole event discharges. There's a plasma discharge above the surface that's the same as a nuclear warhead. And this may explain in the Mahabharata, the nuclear wars. They might have been saying that, but there were no nuclear wars. There were giant things that were discharging, blowing up cities, and they thought they were being attacked by the gods.
Right, it certainly would look like a war.
Yeah. And if something blew up over your city, then it would look like Hiroshima.
Yes.
You know, the people don't get irradiated from if you blow up a nuke high enough in the air, there's not a lot. You can set it up so there's not a lot of radiation, so you can go back in there. And in fact, U.S. troops went to Nagasaki and like 10 days later, and it was very minor radiation.
Yeah, because that fallout it's gonna end up like in the ground. It's not gonna hang in the air for extended periods of time.
Yeah, so in these black mats, there's also the nanodiamonds, like you said, which are cubic hexagonal Lonsdaleite. It's a very specific type of diamond.
And not normally found on Earth.
No, they're not found on Earth. So that therein is the interesting, that is proof that the impact hypothesis is true. It doesn't even have to be an impact. Remember, these could be blowing up above the surface. And in fact, the unusual shape and style of the Carolina Bays, and for those that don't know what we're talking about, if you go south of the Great Lakes and to the East Coast, all the way from, let's say, Pennsylvania, all the way down to Georgia, there's a giant field of these elongated, semicircular impact structures that are referred to as Carolina Bays. Now, the unique thing about them is that there are no asteroids or meteorites inside them. There's no evidence of an impact door. So one idea, if you look at some of the most recent papers, and we shared one on our show the other night over at Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube, a really specific paper that looked at all of the trajectories of these impactors. Did you see that information?
No, I didn't see that actually. I'd like to.
Okay, well, they all, if you reverse triangulate them, they all point up towards areas near Saginaw and Michigan and the Great Lakes. This is where an ice sheet was. Okay, so if you have something that comes in at an angle and actually hits the ice sheet at, let's say, 50,000 miles an hour, a big object, it is going to, a 5-mile thick ice sheet, it is going to blow that ice like missiles out and away. And they're going to make impact and make these things, and then they're going to melt. Yes. And that's it. And very few people have even considered that. But I think that is 100% what the Carolina Bays are. Those are shrapnel from the ice sheet, from one of the many objects. Because remember, there's lots of objects. When you look at the Younger Dryas impact field, it goes all the way from Siberia to California. I mean, it's huge.
That's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I was looking at that map this morning and thinking that the shape of that area that was impacted by Younger Dryas, I guess as far as we know, I don't know if there's other areas that might have been impacted that we don't know about yet, but it does appear to look kind of like a dispersal, like something, like exactly what you're describing, something coming in at an angle and the dispersal that comes out this way. It kind of has that shape.
It also, in rethinking it all morning, you have to consider the rotation of the Earth. And this may be a single event that happened in, let's say, 12 hours. So you've got the main impactors coming in, and they affected the big circular area. And then as the planet is rotating into it, there are still smaller things coming in afterwards that fill in that secondary field. So there's a big field and then some secondary things coming in. It might be just all happen in 12 hours, and we're looking at the rotation of the Earth rotating into the field of the stream, let's say, which makes the idea of it being a huge solar outburst with actual pieces of the sun hitting the Earth and hitting. It'd be like molten lava if plasma, the surface of the Earth, hit the ice sheet. It might melt it and refreeze it into weird torpedo-like ice balls. Like, we don't have any, there's no modeling of this. We have no idea.
There's so much propensity for like domino effects of various effects, you know, depending on what we hypothesize might have caused this. There's a myriad of things that could have happened that could maybe explain, you know, the 2,000 years of cooling with the peaks that come up in the process. I mean, there's so many. I'm now thinking about, you know, if this impact clearly had a huge magnitude, could it have even changed the rotation of the Earth to some degree, or our orbit to some degree? I mean, there's a lot of things that could have happened in there.
Well, yeah, because we just hit Didymos with a van-sized satellite, and we moved that, changed that orbit.
Sure.
But let's get back to I just had an idea that we can fill in. One of the leading hypotheses after that 14,900 year warming, the reason we had the rapid cooling again was similar to what people are predicting, including myself, is going to happen in the near future. That when the Beaufort Gyre, a huge freshwater gyre that's about 1/5 of the Arctic Ocean, is released to the south into the Atlantic or towards the Atlantic, it has the potential to shut down the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which includes the Gulf Stream. And this is what makes Europe warm. So it would, if there was a rapid warming during an ice age and all that glacial water starts melting, you're going to have fresh water rushing into the oceans. It's going to shut down all of the ocean circulating patterns in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And we're going to go right back into ice age, which is exactly what happened. And each time we were trying to recover because we're supposed to be in the warming time. And then the nail in the coffin, as they say, is this impact event. And we go right to hell. But I think that the mass extinction part, like we would have made it into a deeper ice age had it not been this catastrophic cosmic catastrophe, which includes burning everything, radioactive beryllium falling down. Like, it's crazy.
Sounds like a great time to be alive. But
Well,
also kind of in line with what you were just saying, perhaps this is the thing that switched us from a 40,000 year cycle to a 100,000 year cycle. I mean, I tend to think
no,
that
that's 400,000 years ago that it switched. So.
I'm misinterpreting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This Younger Dryas event is a recent, unique thing that happened during one of these normal warming events, which we can't explain. We say it's Milankovic, but it's not. And so what I think is happening here is that the sun resonates at different frequencies, and that 40,000 year modulation was a resonance of the sun, like it's powering, wah, wah, wah.
Right.
And then for some reason, because of the universe, nothing to do with Earth or the solar system, it's changed. It changed into a different 100,000 year or so galactic wave. And this galactic wave idea comes also from our good friend, Paul Laviolette. Now let's talk, I'm going to give you a little bit of his data, which is so specific, it's like mind-blowing. And what he did was he looked at those lake sediments called varves. And so we're just puttering along, and then we have that warming event that drives temperature up, and then we have these two cooling events before the Younger Dryas event. And during all that temperature change, the radiocarbon excess readings on Earth are the same. So none of those fluctuations are coming from space. They're just sitting there doing their normal stuff, normal cosmic rays coming in, normal solar cycles, maybe a grand solar minimum in there, a little up and down in the solar cycle, but nothing significant until 12,973, when it just starts to go straight up. It goes up a factor of 70%. From 12,973 to 12,837. That's like 140 years. And then it takes a while to come down. And why do you think that is? In fact, it takes almost 500 years to drop back down.
I'm thinking about it, it's like the Earth is absorbing huge quantities of energy, and it's going to take some time to release that.
Well, these are radioactive nucleotides that are raining down on us. They're being captured in the ionosphere and the mesosphere, and they're staying up there. So the whole area gets filled with it, and then it takes hundreds of years. It takes hundreds of years to get from the stratosphere to the atmosphere. It's almost like a boundary layer that doesn't let stuff through.
Yeah.
And so if we get enough of it pouring into Earth, then that the top layer of our atmosphere is going to contain it all and hold it in there, and it's going to rain down over a period of here. It takes, when a big event like that, like say if a comet littered our ionosphere and that whole area, the mesosphere and the everything above the atmosphere with cosmogenic, like a dust tail came through, we would be dying of cancer at high numbers for decades, if not hundreds of years.
And perhaps also experiencing mutations and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is where all evolution is coming from.
Yeah.
And if we could pull up the screen shares, I haven't been able to successfully be able to do that, but I will do this in a different show where we'll be able to show all this. If you look at the paleontological data from this time period, this 150 years, we've got all types of species going extinct. And right on the other side, there's all types of new species. So during this 150 years, we've got genetic mutations happening, and then these mutants are mating and having viable offspring. And then they're called something new. It's literally science fiction is fact.
It literally makes us extraterrestrial.
And we do have a commercial break, so we'll be right back. That was pretty awesome. See you in a few minutes.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. #1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. #2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. #3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. #4 is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You gotta love that fake audience, don't you?
I was going to say the fake applause track. Why am I so dark all of a sudden?
Oh, dear. Well, guys, if you're just joining us or you lost place, what we're talking about is a fraudulent scientific endeavor over the last decade or so to anthropogenically blame humans on the mass extinction during the Younger Dryas event, But now I think there's a few less scientists that are actually going down that alley because the overwhelming evidence that we've just been discussing is leaning towards something else happening. And we have better explanations for it here. We can explain the mass extinction. We can explain speciation. We're basically, from this lone event, you can rewrite all of evolutionary theory. And a group of scientists from Harvard, Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould, tried to do that back in the 90s, and they got poo-pooed. They rewrote it, evolution. They renamed it punctuated equilibria. They said, based on the data, we don't know what, but something happens where everybody dies and then everybody's new. And this is all what's been going on through all of geologic time. And based on this, what is driving evolution are these cosmic catastrophes here on the planet. And so welcome to the show, Cosmic Catastrophe.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with this is, and just for our listeners, just so you know, my background is in philosophy of science and physics. And philosophy of science is really a field that kind of evaluates scientific knowledge systems for how well they describe the universe. I feel like part of the biggest problem here is that as humans, we're so self-centered. You know, we think that everything comes from the earth, that the earth has its own cycles that aren't influenced by anything else, when in reality, I mean, we're looking at events that are of such large magnitude that we really have to look outside of Earth for the causes of that. What else is going on in the universe that's causing these cycles, that's causing us to have, you know, a massive spike suddenly out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere? Like, that's not coming just from Earth. It's not coming just from us humans either. I think that's really faulty thinking.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the humanitarian angle here. So if you were on Earth and you're a Clovis person, was a bad day. So you're in the San Luis Valley, you're hunting mammoths, and then you look up and you're like, oh my God. And you have no idea what's happening. Maybe objects are coming in. You have to imagine if there are a number of large objects that are entering the atmosphere during the day, the way that you see that is it's like weather being made, almost like you would think Dane Wigington explains geoengineering, like the clouds out of the back of a plane. This would be some epic type of clouds or with fire, and then they would hit the earth. And if they were large enough, it doesn't matter where they hit them. Even if they hit on the other side of the earth's going to ring. And it's also going to, remember the Hunga Tunga eruption? You're going to have shockwave after shockwave blowing out eardrums and all kind of horrible effects. So humanity is going to be well aware that something big is happening. And the humanity that was in North America didn't make it. They went extinct. They are all gone. But North America was repopulated about 1,000 or 1,500 years later when the Folsom culture shows up, which has a completely different lithic technology. So there is a period in North America that it was just a hellhole for 1,000 years. And well, after it all burned and got smashed, like, it's going to take a while for anything to grow back and animals to come in. So even if you were there and made it, you'd starve to death initially.
It's really hard to imagine living through that time. I mean, you wouldn't have lived through it. Ultimately, you would have been killed. But it just must have been completely terrifying.
Well, here's what's unique. If you go right on the edge of the Younger Dryas impact field, and I'm looking at it right now, you're going to be in the Fertile Crescent. Egypt is right there, and Turkey is right there. And this is where we have a civilization at 11,500 years ago. Now, this is another significant date. This is what the date for Göbekli Tepe. And there's another site, the name is escaping me, that I just did a podcast on, that is dated, that has the same features, that is dated to 12,000 years. So this event occurs, and whoever's on Earth now starts carving pillars, cosmic pillars that are archaeoastronomical, that incorporate the precession of the equinoxes. These people are telling us we know about a 26,000 year cycle. And they're carving these pillars, and then they intentionally bury it at the end of the Younger Dryas event. Right at the end of that cooling event, when sea levels start rising another 150 to 180 feet, they bury everything because they might think that the whole world is going to go underwater. And I think that's what they thought. They're smart. They're watching. They're like, the sea's coming back up again. And they bury these sites because they know that like half of the they've got the memo. They were around for 1,000 years after the event. They probably went to North America and they went, holy sh! Oh my God. They went there to see their buddies, the Clovis people, and they're all gone, vaporized. And so they then came back and they're like, dude, we got to do the monuments, man. The whole other world is dead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, I never really thought about it that much, but the idea that there is not something like, well, not that we found anyway, a Göbekli Tepe in North America. If there is one, it's probably, completely buried.
Or blown up, blown away.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps when stuff like this started, maybe it wasn't, well, I'm sure it was scary, but not as confusing as I said, because, what you just said is that humanity knew these things were coming. Otherwise, we would not have built these monuments and we would not have buried them.
No, or after the 12-9, 12-8 event, they then made the monuments. This is a global culture because I did a podcast on Easter Island, the 12 basaltic moai that come from a quarry that is now under the ocean because it was done when sea levels were low. They were building those basaltic moai at the same time Göbekli Tepe and all the tepes. Now you got to remember, the hill at just Göbekli Tepe has potentially over 1,000 of those circles. That's all at the top. People say, oh, it was buried in the flood. These are the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Even if the ocean washes over, the sediments are in the valleys. It does not cover the tops of hills. Tops of hills would get eroded away. That's actually evidence that the ocean didn't wash over Göbekli Tepe because it's buried and it was safe. And so we have to start rethinking. This global society knew the big event happened. They knew that all the people and all the animals, all the mammoths in North America are gone, that everyone was hunting. And they said, this is big. And they made these monuments. And this was all during that 1,500 years from the event to then the sea level rise, which sunk Atlantis.
Yeah.
And so Atlantis might have been the hub of all the seafaring people, literally in the middle of the Atlantic, over into Europe. And the closest route from Atlantis to escape would be somewhere near Turkey. So maybe the Göbekli Tepe people are Atlanteans.
Yeah. But when you look at Göbekli Tepe, though, the volume of information that would seem to be contained in those carvings that we don't really exactly know how to translate right now, but certainly suggests this is not an isolated incident. This is something that has happened before and knowledge had been passed forward. Otherwise, there just wouldn't be that much information there. Do you agree with that idea?
Well, just the fact that they knew the precession of the equinoxes,
Yeah.
and the fact that this has been encoded into so many structures around the world, and the work of Hamlet's Mill by von Deschen, who calculated that there are hundreds of structures that mathematically have the precession of the equinoxes designed into it. Now, how did these cultures that are thousands of years old know this before we discovered it recently?
Yeah, well, clearly there was a tradition of passing on important information that did not carry over until now.
Yeah,
and clearly a lot of this information is being hidden from us.
Right. I didn't learn about the great year in 3rd grade when I should have.
Right.
Because it's literally the most important calendar. The calendar we use now is made up. The great year is not made up. It happens that way always. That's why there is Native American sites that are archaeoastronomical, like we have right here, 15 miles away from us.
Well, and we were also taught, right, that humanity, began with the agricultural, I'm sorry, I'm losing my words here. The invention of agriculture, right? And that everything before that, we were just cavemen. That seems completely silly. I mean, all of this knowledge would clearly indicate that we've We have been advanced civilizations in the past, probably
In
many
1990,
times.
in 1990, we taught that agriculture began 6,500 years ago.
Right. Which
In
is
2000, we pushed that back to 8,000 years ago. And then by 2005, we've got Göbekli Tepe.
right. With these incredibly intricate carvings and stuff. And right, we were just cavemen and didn't even know how to do agriculture then. Okay.
The
Sure.
first archaeological explanation for Göbekli Tepe was a skull cult.
I know, I remember.
They ate people. Yeah, they were hunter-gatherers that make voodoo things. I mean,
But this is again, I feel like this is another function of the human psyche, at least in the modern human psyche, where we believe that that progress always happens in a linear fashion, that we were always less advanced than we were before, and that's clearly not the case. We have lost knowledge along the way, obviously.
the Sphinx enclosure was flooded and filled in, and it hadn't rained in Egypt since about 11,000 years ago during the Younger Dryas event. And if you look at all the flooding in North Africa, that happened probably at the same time, where it literally rained for months, it appears. And then the same thing, we have a catastrophic event happening in the Pacific Northwest. These great floods are everywhere. There's evidence of flooding in the Appalachians. The formation of all the wind gaps that you know about, Delaware water gap and the water gaps, those are antithetical to any erosional geology or geomorphology on the planet. And they get explained by like, oh, the river was there for millions of years and then the land went up. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. Whatever. So fairy tales and science are the norm. And the whole anthropogenic explanation is really annoying that, oh, we had to kill it. It has to be our fault.
Well, that's always the default. When we can't explain anything, we say that we did it. I mean, how egocentric is that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people out there think that we can control the climate.
Well, that too. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's the same thing. It's the same.
You just pay more taxes and everything gets better. I just saw a headline that Governor DeSantis made Ian stronger because he's a climate change denier.
I saw that.
And someone's like, okay, so if I just believe in climate change, then the hurricane stops.
I mean, I will say there's a lot to be said for, influencing things around you with your mind, but that's really pretty far-fetched.
And so,
also, I don't think that Governor DeSantis wanted that hurricane to hit his state that way. So,
all right, so we have this advanced culture on Earth. We get hit by thousands of impactors. The whole northern hemisphere lights on fire. That's going to create a soot cloud and basically a nuclear winter, which is why it stayed cold for about 1,500 years. It took that long. It took 500 years for the radioactive nucleotides to rain out of the atmosphere and the mesosphere all the way up to space. And then it stayed cold for another 1,000 years. And then it all broke again. And whatever caused that initial warming just continued to happen again. And so that's another unexplainable phenomenon.
I wonder if, it was something like, okay, let's say that this was partially explained by an impact from outer space. Maybe, let's say it was a comet that broke up. We could have been re-entering the debris field of that comet several times, and maybe that would help explain some of the temperature spikes. Although, again,
there's no radiogenic material. There's only the one spike.
Oh, right. Yes.
One spike, one spike only.
Yeah.
So that throws out all because I had that idea, but no, it's probably not that. Probably not that.
So, I mean, in which case, it would seem to be that the answer has to be that it's something to do with the sun.
Yeah, the sun controls everything.
Something that can create a huge magnitude impact of some kind. I don't mean impact in the literal sense. I mean impact on our climate.
Well, maybe if this so this is what tends to happen. And this is observational science. What we've seen in the last 10 years, because we can look at the sun, is that anytime there is a sun-diving comet, no matter how small, let's say 70% of the time, or it might even be higher, I'd have to go look at more data. But as soon as a sun diving comet comes in and hits the sun, there's a coronal mass ejection on the other side.
Yeah.
So comet comes in, hits. So if we have a huge comet that breaks up and the majority of the debris is around the sun, it's inside of the Earth's orbit. We only get hit on the first flyby. And it breaks up. It could take 1,500 years for all of it to finally hit the sun. And during that time, the sun is blasting out solar flares. I don't know.
That's a very interesting idea. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, but the Earth wouldn't stay cool because we'd have all this extra energy, unless whatever happened during this 140 years that dumped all this weird cosmogenic stuff kept the Earth just dark for 1,500 years. And then finally it cleared up and the temperature went right back up.
Right.
It might be that simple, that it was literally, but how could anyone survive on the surface?
Yeah. But we, and I don't know if the timing matches up, but we do see, and you can probably answer this better because you have those numbers in your head better, but we do see evidence of people living in caves at certain time. For example, on Easter Island, there's evidence of that, of people living in caves for periods of time.
Yeah, but you still have to have plants and animals living outside.
True.
To harvest and eat.
True.
And it might just be that in a time when the sun never rises and there's just low light, that everything evolves to that low light setting so that you have some kind of, that's the time of dragons, perhaps.
Who knows? This reminds me a little bit too, and this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I saw an article recently that really made me laugh that was suggesting that the Hunga Tunga explosion, while acknowledging the fact that volcanoes are associated with global cooling for the reason you mentioned earlier, leaving debris and dust in the atmosphere, this article said, well, while all volcanoes, tend to cause global cooling, Hunga Tunga will cause global warming. I was like, what?
Yeah.
There was really no good explanation within the article.
Yeah. So, let's get back to the story of this catastrophe. We have this global civilization. The event happens. People, if you look at the Younger Dryas impact field, there were people living all around the field. So they witnessed like the fires, and I'm sure they went towards them to see what it was and realized the whole world is on fire. I mean, that would be the only way to describe it. Everything east is on fire forever. And then they would go up on the mountains to get better vantages and they would confirm it. Like it would be just obliterated forever. And maybe they then tried to circumnavigate the perimeter. They would have generations to do this.
Yeah.
And that's why they're burying these monumental things that are so technologically advanced that the cultures that are shortly thereafter them aren't even at that level. And apparently they were unaware that they were buried and right near them.
Yes.
Because there are tons of cultures that are in Turkey that are 9,000 years old. The Sanliurfa man, the weird white guy with no eyeballs, I'm sure you've seen that statue. They lived in just simple towns, and they right next to where Göbekli Tepe was buried. And maybe they didn't pass on the information. They didn't know it was there because they could have unearthed it and used it as a shrine. But we just found it. So it's like something happened with the chain of command that we lost all knowledge of everything.
Well, I mean, it may just be as simple as with a catastrophe that large, and then killing off large segments of the population, you may have just ended up with a population that was very small and just struggling to survive, right? So there's not really any time or energy to look for the information or something, or, unbury Göbekli Tepe, which we didn't unbury until, what was that, like 2001? Or was it later than that, 2010?
They had been working on it for decades. I think the first report was around 2000. And by 2009, the head guy, whatever, Klaus Schwab or whatever his name was, I think he was taken out. He had a heart attack. And then they kind of stopped. They made a museum and they stopped, really work.
Yeah. Yes.
As if there's nothing else there to find. I mean, complete insanity. Every single archaeologist in the world would go there if they were allowed to dig.
Yes. Yes.
So why the suppression of that? We know there's all this misinformation in Egypt. Clearly, the Sphinx predates the Younger Dryas event. And that means that the Great Pyramid predates the Younger Dryas event, and that whoever was there after the event simply carved their names into crap and said, yo, we did it.
Yes.
That's why there's no evidence of how they did it, because they didn't. It was already there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like as soon as we unbury Gobekli Tepe, the first thing that happens is the spread of misinformation that this is a skull cult, which is like, why can't we just have an honest conversation about what was happening here? It's suspicious for sure.
Well, we both believe that there's some sort of an agenda. The agenda started in the 90s when I was at university, and you couldn't study what you wanted to because you were unable to get funding to go all the way to get your PhD and to write your thesis, unless you wanted to self-fund yourself. But if you're a field geologist, you don't have thousands of dollars to go travel around and stay in hotels and look at rocks. You have no money because you have to teach. So and then there was the decompartmentalization of science. When they once had chemistry, physics, and geology all in the same building, they separated the buildings or separated the floors in the late 80s and early 90s. And then that destroyed science. It was almost like how they made the nuclear bomb. They compartmentalized the scientists. Nobody knew what they were working on, a weapon that was going to kill thousands of people. And they duped.
And academia has gotten so much worse than that, right? Because now we have all of this specialization and everybody is off in their own little nook and not talking to each other. And the science is just dispersed. And then just the sheer volume of lying that occurs even in the academic papers. You know, I've seen so many papers where the abstract will conclude something that is not what the paper concludes, because a lot of people only read abstracts, including scientists.
Well, now, and you have to pay for over 90% of the paper's paper. You can read the abstract, but you have to pay $29 to look at it for an hour.
And it's extraordinarily expensive, right? You know, unless you have an institutional relationship with a library, you're not going to be buying those articles. It just costs too much.
Well, and to subscribe to a journal, it costs $500 annually or more.
Right.
So I can't even imagine that was back then. It's probably $2,000 a year to get the Journal of Sedimentology or something.
Yeah.
And that's only one of them. You really need to be getting 50 journals from all, the AGU, multidisciplinary things to actually keep up with science. So there is a clear intention to control science and to prevent science from happening. And we can prove it because the mainstream media, after the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which legalized propaganda in 2012, legalized propaganda for our government, from our government. Our government legalized propaganda so they could utilize the mainstream media as propaganda, and also science as propaganda. The term "the science is settled" is an oxymoron because the definition of science is that it's not settled. Science
is not determined by consensus, ever. It's not how this works.
Right. You keep testing a model and moving forward. There's never an end point.
Right.
And to say the science is settled is so dystopian. And yet almost all kids and everyone that's at university that knows, if you asked about climate, they're like, science is settled.
Science is never settled. That's never the case, ever. There's always more questions to be asked, and there's always another perspective to look at this, and there's always another way to model something.
Right. There's always a better way to look at it, and that's what science is. It questions the current narrative to move into a better narrative. Right. And that's what the problem with cosmology is. Cosmology, the standard model, they've had it forever, for decades. And now everything they discover is baffling.
Mm-hmm.
That's baffling.
This happens,
they're like, your model is wrong. Move to the next model. And they just won't do it.
And this is what happens, right? You know, there's a theory that becomes the accepted theory, the accepted type of explanation. And then you find so many exceptions that you just end up footnoting it all of the time. And then you just end up with a theory that is, sheerly a huge volume of footnotes and exceptions. It's no longer a cohesive theory. Right.
Right. And like the James Webb Space Telescope, they just took a picture of a Wolf-Rayet star that's supposed to be, 1 billion light years away. And it has these perfect, they claim, are dust shells that are perfectly spaced away from the star. The width of the shells is 1,000 light years. and they want to explain it using gravity. And they're like the dumbest thing. And everyone, all the astrophysicists are like, they believe this gobbledygook.
I know.
But if you just look at the evidence from the Sapphire Project and their containment chamber, and you look, you know what a double layer is and how plasma is highly organized, it's clearly plasma in space. There's no way you can get a 1,000 light year wide array of perfect layers without electricity. Yeah. Gravity is just not going to do that. That's those distances and gravity. Oh my God. The insanity is mind boggling. But we're coming to the end of the show.
And we could probably rant about the fallacies in science that exist today for 3 hours.
Yeah, we could. We might do a show on that. So check out our YouTube channels, Magnetic Reversal News and Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Thank you for joining us, Leah.
Thanks for having me on.
And we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B